Hi everyone, welcome to today's Supercharged podcast. Now, today is a very special podcast because, again, we are going to go back in time to the days where we were recording the Living Matrix movie, tracing around all of Europe, getting completely lost in the Barden Mountains, and then we went across an airfield. It was a disused airfield dash army base, and there was this concrete bunker. And inside the concrete bunker, it was very, very, very dark. But weirdly enough, this was the center for biophoton research, the Institute of Biophotons, run by Professor Popp. Now, it was particularly weird for me because we were expecting, if you're going to be studying biophotons, for it to be a very light, energetic, wonderful building. But, of course, there is not much research for biophotons in the world, and unfortunately for Professor Popp, he had to do all of his research in basically what seemed like a bomb underground bunker. So that was the setting. Now, on that little cliffhanger, before we get into Professor Popp and biophotons and basically the interview that we did about 12 years ago with some additional commentary, I'm just going to update everyone on a few things. So this is an exciting year for us because we are launching Energy for Life this year, being 2019. So we have this amazing conference in October where basically we're going to be unveiling a new vision of how sensors, wearables, all the Nest type technology, the latest in how you get energy for life, like the latest in sort of the health world thinking, and we're basically going to be fusing all of that together within a new system, within a new client portal, a new scanner, a new app, a new biosync, etc. So that's pretty cool. So I would say I think our tickets are limited to about 90 people. So if you want those, I would get them fairly fast on the Nest Health website. It's going to be pretty exciting. Also, I just want to say about that. So I've been really fortunate to work with Nikki Gratrix. She was one of the co-founders of the Chronic Fatigue Clinic in London, which basically has become the most prominent chronic fatigue clinic in Europe, and she's basically been working for the past year on this incredible course called Energy for Life, where it's basically a 26 unit course where she's looking at all the ways that you can get energy for life, and she's fused it basically beautifully within the bioenergetic wellness system. So all the various tests, and there'll be new tests and new screens within that, and they're all being linked to various wearables like the Oura Ring, like your like your watch, and the new scanner that we will be launching at the conference. And all of this basically means that you as a client or you as a practitioner, well, let's just go with the client versions, it's easier. You as a client can basically be recommended precisely the sort of life-changing habits that will be most prevalent to you now. Like, is your blood sugar unstable? Should you learn about blood sugar? What can you do about it? That would be really relevant, for you in a particular moment. Should you be doing nice, less and long exercise to recover tomorrow? Is your HRV off? Should you therefore, spend some time doing box breathing or, having longer breathing out rather than breathing in? Basically, because we can integrate all of these different sensors and all of the original Nest scan, we basically have a much more superior algorithm for making health recommendations than I believe anyone actually. We're basically integrating the sort of full Nest philosophy with where a lot of the modern wearables and algorithms are going, and then integrating that to give basically clients a really seamless experience. So you can go from, so there we go, book that for October. I think the date is 13th. Well, anyway, it's on nesthealth.com, the exact date, and there'll be notes in the show notes, no doubt, below. All right, let's just get into Popp. So if you subscribe to this podcast, you're basically interested in having energy for life. And you're also highly curious about the energy fields in the body. And so you're probably also familiar with the phrase light bodies as well. Now, it can be a bit woo-woo, but in this case, it's not. So if you saw the classic old movie Cocoon, you may remember where the friendly aliens, I'm not talking about you, I know you're listening, alien, strip off their human form, and underneath, they're just beaming bright light. Yep, that's a nice visual of a light body. Well, in today's podcast, we are looking at the science behind how we, that is the humans among us, who's that? Okay, really are made up of light, right down to the cellular quantum level, and why this is important for our health. Now, in order to have energy for life, your body needs to be charged with perfectly coherent light, that is, beams of photons at a constant frequency. And as you may remember from our previous podcast, studies have shown people with cancer have less light or less photons in their body. And the goal for all of us is to be beaming with healthy cells powered up by light, but at a perfectly balanced level, known as coherence. This means an optimal state between chaos and order. A few years back, while making a Living Matrix movie documentary about the body field and energy medicine, I interviewed German biophysicist Professor Fritz-Albert Popp. Now, he's known for his work exploring biophotons, and now biophotons are ultraviolet and ultra-weak light that emanate from all living systems, including humans. Now, the biophotons in our cells function as regulators or carriers of information. So biophoton emissions, they provide an ideal communication system for the transfer of information to many cells across our body. And so what are we talking about, the speed of light here? Well, just think faster. The speed of communication in the body, it just can't be explained by the old biochemical model. You've probably heard me say that before, it really cannot. So in this podcast, Professor Popp is going to explain further how only photons could regulate the thousands of chemical reactions and the whole metabolism in our bodies, and in an orderly way. And Professor Popp was the scientist who used a special machine to examine cancer patients and found that they had lost their natural periodic rhythms as well as their coherence. The lines of internal communication were scrambled. In effect, he saw their light literally going out, like pop, as in Professor Popp. Now, in contrast, he found healthy individuals had an exquisite coherence at the quantum level. He also examined the effects of stress. When we're stressed, the rate of light emissions goes up, when it actually needs to be at an equilibrium. According to these studies, health is a state of perfect subatomic communication, while ill health is a state of communication breakdown. We are ill when our waves are out of sync. And having coherent light is literally having good vibes. So Popp even went on to use biophoton emissions as a tool for measuring the quality of food. The healthiest food had the lowest and most coherent intensity of light. For example, in one experiment, he compared the light from free-range hen's eggs with that from penned-in caged hens. The photons in the former were far more coherent than those in the latter, and biophoton emission detection is currently used commercially in the food industry. Now, the scientific research about biophotons in our cells has huge implications for how we understand energy in the body and for influencing the future of medicine. In fact, Professor Popp's experiments showed light emissions were sufficient to orchestrate the body's repairs. Sound familiar? Does that sound like the body field's control system? Hopefully. He explored re-socializing photon emissions of tumour cells back to normal. And he also explored the idea that if we take in the photons of other living things, we might also be able to use the information from them to correct our own light if it went awry. Now, all of this kind of knowledge, it leads us to better understand the need to correct information and reintroduce better communication in the body through energy medicine modalities and other ways, such as what we consume into our bodies. And if that wasn't enough, coming up as well, according to Dr. Popp, the Meridian system transmits specific energy waves to specific zones of the body, so stay tuned for that. And he'll also discuss the transfer of information between people, such as between a practitioner and their client, and how there's more chance of a healing modality being successful when there is harmony or coherence and a positive intention between the two people. So to kick off the interview, I asked the professor about his background, and I popped the big question: what got you interested in biophysics as opposed to just physics?
Yes, in order to find out what cancer is, I found that there are carcinogenic compounds. Their activity could only be explained in terms of their optical properties. So, for instance, benzoepyrene is a very harmful substance, but benzoepyrene is one of the most powerful carcinogenic compounds. And both these molecules have the same chemical properties. So you cannot distinguish them because they are more or less the same molecules, only with a shift of a benzene ring in the molecule. So nobody could explain that the one is so active and the other is so harmless. And I found out that the optical properties are completely different. And only the optical properties are the ones in which they are different at all. So the idea was that the optical properties are decisive for cancer development. And there is a photo repair function in the body where by photons you can repair the damages. And if you have not this possibility to repair, cancer may develop. For instance, xeroderma pigmentosum is a disease where this repair function doesn't work. And it's photons which are responsible for the repairs. They are in the UV range or in the blue UV range. And just in this range, there is a difference between benzoepyrene and benzoepyrene.
So to clarify and elaborate a little, Dr. Popp discovered that benzoprene, the cancer-producing molecule, absorbed the UV light, then re-emitted it at a completely different frequency. It was a light scrambler. The benzoprene, which is harmless to humans, allowed the UV light to pass through it unaltered. Now, puzzled by this difference, he experimented with UV light and other compounds, testing some 37 different chemicals, some cancer-causing, some not. And after a while, he was able to predict which substances could cause cancer. In every instance, the compounds that were carcinogenic took the UV light, absorbed it, and changed or scrambled the frequency. There was another old property of these compounds. Each of the carcinogens reacted only to light at a specific frequency, 380 nanometers, which which we've taken note, and they will be used in one of, I didn't ever mention it, but we are inventing a hearable type device that will be shining light up through the ear at certain frequencies with certain sets of information on it. I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to ruin the big announcement that might come later. He kept wondering why a cancer-causing substance would be a light scrambler. He began reading the scientific literature, specifically about human biological reactions, and came across information about the phenomenon called photo repair. So my next question was, how did you come to discover that biophotons help in the repair mechanism of a cell?
There was, at that time, I was invited by the Cancer Research Center in Heidelberg, and I talked about my theory. And they said, in order that your theory is correct, there should be light in the cells, because if the molecules are not activated, you will not have a difference. So the optical transitions in these regions should be permanently excited. And I said, why not? So we said, okay, then we will find out whether there is light in cells or not. I asked for support, for financial support. They gave me this support, and we started in Marburg. I was at that time an assistant professor of biophysics, and they supported my work, and we started to look for these photons. I knew from the beginning on that it must not be very high intensity, but it was clear that one should have these photons at all in a cell. So we started to work on this field. I had a very gifted student who made his PhD by this work, and I asked him to construct an equipment where one could measure photons in this range. I knew that it has to be very sensitive, this equipment. Otherwise, one could not find it. He told me there is no photons in this range in cells. Nobody believed at that time. So I said, okay, then show evidence that there is no photons in the cells. And he started to show evidence that there are no photons. And I said, okay, if you show evidence that there is no photons, you can get your PhD too. Why not? And so we started, and about 2 years later, we had an equipment where we saw that all living systems, we started with cucumber seedlings and later with other ones, and all living systems which we put into the instrument showed this very weak photon emission, but not only in the 380 nanometer range, where we expected it, over the whole visible range. We could see this photon emission. At the beginning, nobody believed in it. And we started to consider what is their role or what is their function. And then we found also that before us, other groups and other scientists had shown already evidence of this biophoton emission, photon emission, I had to say. They were thinking that they come from chemical reactions. And this was the first thing which we found out or which we believed in. We could not believe that chemical reactions are so important. Look, for instance, that it was not important for the role of these two carcinogenic compounds. The chemical properties were the same. So we expected just the opposite. We expected the photons are triggering the chemical reactions, but they are not originating mainly from chemical reactions. You have in one cell, you have per second about 100,000 chemical reactions. That's well known. So this is the average. And in order to regulate these functions, that at any instant, at the right position and at the right time, the right chemical reaction takes place, you have to have a most perfect informational system, which gives you the information so that a definite reactions has to take place at the right time. And the only possibility for that are photons, because in order to trigger a chemical reaction, you have to activate at least one of the molecules which takes part in the reaction. So, and to activate a molecule in the right range, the right spectral range, you have to have photons. So it was clear from the beginning on that this can happen only by photons which have to be in the cell. Of course, I recognized it later, not at the beginning already, but with the time I became aware that only photons could regulate these chemical reactions, the whole metabolism. And it could not be a chaotic regulation, it had to be strongly ordered.
And so is the purpose of the biophoton to contain and coordinate everything in the cell?
This can be mediated only by photons. So the photons should be the carrier of the information which is necessary to regulate the metabolism. This was completely clear after some time of thinking about the situation. And then it was clear that you have two possibilities. The one is that the photons originate from chemical reactions, which is possible, of course, or they are triggering the chemical reactions. This is possible at the same time too. And at least the high information content which is necessary can come only from the photons. Molecules are very stupid. They cannot regulate themselves. They have to have a field, more or less, electromagnetic field, which is necessary to activate the molecules.
So this begs the question, what actually creates a photon emission in the cell? And as the professor will explain, there needs to be an order, a coherence, and timing is everything.
It is, the photons have to be very coherent. They cannot be ordinary photons. The coherence time of an artificial photon is in the order of, say, a nanosecond. The coherence time of the photons of a laser is about a tenth of a second. But you have to consider coherence times which are even much longer, or the degree of coherence should be much higher. By the way, last spring is now this spring in Berkeley in California, they showed evidence that the quantum coherence in photosynthesis is much higher than expected. So the efficiency of photosynthesis is much higher than they expect. There is almost no entropy production with that because this coherence is rather high. It plays a big role, a very important role, for instance, for the heat, for the warming of the Earth. And not only there, but in all biological systems. You have this perfect efficiency of the different reactions, which is only possible with more or less a perfect quantum coherence of all the things which happen. So these photons in a biological system have a very, very high degree of coherence. And we showed evidence in the last years of that. You can show it by means of the possibility of statistics, or photocount statistics. The photocount statistics can give a proof of the high degree of coherence. And we showed evidence already. We took about 10 years in order to show that, and to measure the degree of coherence of biophotons. So we are convinced now that the biophotons are the regulator of all the functions in the cells. It must not be only in the optical range, but you can take these photons in other ranges too, in the infrared range, in the microwave range, and so on. But you have always the same principles. A very high degree of coherence. I do not say that it must be coherence, but it can be coherence. It can be very, very, very coherent.
So next I asked the professor to describe one of his experiments where he sent infrared photons into the meridian systems and observed the photons along the meridian. And with his amazing microscopic view, what is the meridian really like?
One can show, for instance, by moxibustion, a friend of mine did it. I was not the inventor of this very surprising result. If you make a moxibustion, immediately you see that there appear channels on the body, and these channels are identical to the meridians of the Chinese medicine, usually. But one has to say, you can also produce channels which are different from the meridians. The whole skin is able to build these kind of channels. And these channels are dependent on the circumstances, on the where you induce a max combustion. How are the relation? How is the situation? As you cannot say where a flash will take its trace or its way. It is not possible to say usually how these channels, where these channels appear. Depends on the situation, on the field situation, on the whole point, on the whole situation. But what you can show and what is really very clear is that even without max combustions, there are some preferable regions where these channels appear most likely. And it depends a little on the morphological situation, also on the boundary conditions and so on. The meridians are different from the skin, because in the infrared photography they are much hotter than the surroundings. They are really hot. They can get a temperature. It's not a real temperature. It's an excitation temperature. And this temperature can be about 40 degrees or even 50 degrees.
So next I asked, what difference does it make when the body is active? When the body is moving or having an increase in metabolism, does the body produce much more biophotons because more information is needed at that time?
Intensity. It's really a question of the coherence and of the distribution of the photons. You can get even phases where mainly destructive interference is valid. And this is very important in a living system, that you can make destructive interference too. So you produce more or less shadow with light. And on the other hand, you have parts where you have a rather high intensity. So in this way, by the patterns, you transfer not only information, you transfer also the energy and distribute it over the whole system.
So when a practitioner is trying to heal somebody, whether that's through homeopathy or acupuncture or healing devices, for instance, is that also transferring information in some form to that person? And can that information help nudge the body to get better?
We have to know that coherence is not only important for the visibility and for the different functions of information transfer. It is also important for the distance over which you can transfer information. At rather high degrees of coherence, which are technically not possible, but in our biological systems they are possible. You have even to consider that the information can get out of the body over a longer distance and can be transferred and can be controlled and regulated over many say kilometers of distance. But it is very difficult, because with increasing coherence in this range, the matter becomes transparent. So over long distances, you have the possibility to transfer information in terms of resonance principles. If you have a complicated antenna here and a complicated antenna here, which can transfer information by resonance, you can do it over many kilometers of distance.
There is a lot of talk about the placebo effect and intention. Could there be a connection between different information systems whereby the information is more important than the connection?
It must not be a permanent, say, straightforward information. It is some overlapping of the systems. It is even difficult to say who is now the sender and who is the emitter. it becomes more and more a non-locality. And this information cannot be taken by conscious, more or less, but it is more subconsciousness. It is more it is not like in a telephone. It is some kind of agreement or finding the feeling to be in one state or such things. And all these different kinds of information become possible by simply by coherence, by a high degree of coherence. And so the information gets completely different ways as we are commonly used of.
And so I asked the professor whether this is like saying that the information exists anyway, but two people can access it at the same time. Like information that is recorded in a reality, but the patient and the therapist are just accessing it simultaneously.
For instance, we speak of zeitgeist sometimes. So many people think the same things. And it is a tuning into the surroundings and the environment. And the information character must not be personal. It may have many different roles. And one who said that and who is, in my opinion, at least in principle correct, is Sheldrake, for instance. He thinks of such kind of information. And one knows the most important point is this kind of information depends not on the intensity, it depends on resonance conditions which can happen at very, very low intensities. For instance, the information in a cell which is necessary in order to regulate the whole metabolism. It is not necessary to have a lot of photons. You can do it with one photon. With one photon, you can regulate about 10 to the 9 reactions per second. Why? Because a chemical reaction takes place in about 10 to minus 9 seconds. Then the photon triggers the reaction. The compounds become reactive by taking up this photon. But after a nanosecond, the reaction is over and the photon gets back, it plays a catalytic role, gets back to the field, which is not thermalized. So it is available again for the next reaction again. It is a non-local coherent field. And after a nanosecond, the next photon is available. So you have two photons in 10 to minus 9 seconds, which means that you can trigger about 10 to 9 reactions per second with one photon. So you need not very high intensities. You can do it in a non-local field with one photon. And the same happens not only in one cell because of the transparency, it works in the whole body. And over the body, it can also work outside of the body, in distant parts of the body. And of course, there is a big chance that it goes down with the intensity, that with the distance, it goes down after a definite law. We don't know it must not be a square law, but take even that it is an S square law. Nevertheless, it is a big distance at which you can get information by resonance principles. I calculated that if you have a high tuning of resonance, you have always the possibility of an information transfer. Of course, it may not be ordinary, but we are more or less used to it. We take some information of it without knowing that we take information of it. And it is very difficult to show experimental evidence of that. But for instance, in the Second World War, many mothers, they immediately knew that their son was shot down or killed in Russia. why could this happen? Many mothers said it, and it was evidence that they really knew it, because the DNA is a very complex molecule, and mother and son have probably some resonance possibilities. So over the distance from Russia to Germany, there could be some kind of information just switched on when the son was died in Russia. This could have happened.
Pretty incredible. So if you're a therapist, perhaps you're tapping into such resonance even from a distance. So do electrons and photons also have the non-locality property?
Of course, you can construct non-local situations, but you need in this field always, this is an important point, you need a very high degree of coherence. Otherwise, it would not work.
Next, I asked Professor Popp a little about his research involving personally working with healers. So if you're a practitioner, how important is the connection and exchange of information between you and your client? And what about your intention to heal? What role does that play? And do the studies suggest all of this could be happening with the healer and client relationship too?
I have the impression that it works probably in the same way. I myself was subject now of several trials, and I can now measure with our equipment whether you have an improvement of the regulatory capacity of a body or not after such a process. And in the overwhelming number of cases, I saw that a healer influences and supports the regulatory activity of the body. And we have different healers. The one makes it with this method, the other with another method. But I have the impression that the healer have to concentrate and to wish to influence the body in a positive sense. For instance, I have two healers, and the one healer I do not like this healer. I do not know why, but she has never success with me. Or she's the only one who is not successful, but she is successful in other cases. So probably the intention plays a strong role in this interconnection or exchange of information.
So I hope you really enjoyed listening to the episode about Professor Popp. It's a pretty fascinating subject, the whole biophoton end. There is an awful lot of other cutting edge research going on, and earlier I sort of mentioned about this hearable type device. We will be integrating a lot of the biophoton light research within our next set of hearable devices, which are pretty exciting, which will basically be available for everyone in the sort of energy for life stratosphere that is coming next. All right, well, thank you, and talk to you in the next episode.